The doctor didn't look up from his clipboard when he told her. That was the part Willa remembered most clearly years later. Not the words themselves. Bilateral tubal occlusion, structural anomaly, conception unlikely without significant medical intervention, but the fact that Dr. Harmon kept his eyes on his notes the entire time, like he was reading a grocery list, like the thing he was dismantling wasn't the shape of the life she'd been quietly building inside her head since she was 7 years old and already naming her future children after her grandmother's favorite flowers. Marigold, rose, clover. She sat there in the paper gown with the thin crinkle that announced every small movement she made, and she nodded. She said, "Okay, and I understand and thank you for telling me," because she'd been raised in a house in Barrie, Ontario, where you thanked people even when they handed you catastrophe. She drove home on the 400 with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. She didn't cry until she was sitting in the parking lot of her apartment building, engine still running, and even then it wasn't the ugly sob she might have expected. It was the quiet kind, the kind that happens when something you didn't know you were carrying finally gets too heavy. She was 29. She played piano at a recording studio on King Street West. Session work, mostly, the kind that paid well enough and kept her anonymous enough, which was how she preferred things. She had a cat named Biscuit, a second-floor apartment with good light, and a mother who called every Sunday and asked when she was going to settle down. She had not planned on this. The call came 6 days later, while she was recording an overdub for someone else's album. Her phone buzzed on the piano bench beside her. Unknown number, area code she didn't recognize, and she let it go to voicemail. Then it buzzed again and again. She stepped out of the booth. The voice on the recording was her father's, except it wasn't quite her father's voice. It was compressed somehow, wrong in the way voices get when someone is holding themselves very carefully together. "Willa, it's me. I need you to call me back. It's about the money. I need you to call me back right now." Her father, Bernard Willa, knew. She'd always thought of him as Bernard, even as a child, because he was the kind of man who existed most fully in the role of Bernard who fixed things. Her father had made a series of decisions over the past 3 years that he'd chosen not to share with the family. The picture that emerged when she called him back was this: a business partner who wasn't, a loan that had compounded in ways Bernard hadn't fully read the fine print on, and a debt that had a name attached to it that made her father's voice go small and strange. Voss Consolidated. Willa didn't know the name then. She would come to know it the way you come to know the sound of a storm. First as something distant and abstract, then as something you could feel in your back teeth. "They want the property, Willa. The house, your mother's house. Unless, the word sat between them on the phone line like a third person. "There's an offer on the table," Bernard said. "I didn't know what else to do. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She learned the rest of it in pieces. Voss Consolidated was not, technically, a real estate company, though it owned more real estate in southern Ontario than most municipalities. It was not, technically, a financial services firm, though it moved more money through the province than several chartered banks. What it was, technically, was the legitimate face of something that the people who knew about it didn't talk about in public places. The man who ran it was named Stellan Voss. No, wait, she'd used Stellan already. The man who ran it was named Crispin Voss. Crispin Aldous Voss, 41 years old, photographed occasionally at charity galas in a way that suggested he had agreed to be present but not to be warm about it. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been assembled by someone who understood the mechanics of attractiveness, but had never personally experienced delight. Dark eyes, a mouth set in a line, silver threading through dark hair at the temples, that he had apparently come by honestly and early. He had 3 children. She found this out from the documents her father forwarded, haltingly, over 2 days. The terms of the arrangement that someone in Voss's office had drawn up, as if this were a normal transaction between reasonable parties, as if the item being negotiated was not Willa herself. The arrangement was not marriage exactly. It was presented as a household position, a term that her father used and that she knew was chosen specifically because it sounded less like what it was. Crispin Voss required a permanent household presence for his 3 children, whose current caretaking situation was, according to the documents, untenable and requiring immediate resolution. In exchange for Willa fulfilling this role, in his home under his roof, integrated into the structure of the household, the debt would be cleared. Her parents' house would remain her parents' house. She read the documents 3 times. Each time she got to the line about integration into the household structure, she had to put them down and look at the window. She was a musician. She worked in studios. She had a cat and an apartment with good light, and she had just spent 6 days quietly grieving, something she would never have. And now her father was asking her to become the live-in caretaker for the children of a man who operated somewhere in the grey space between powerful and dangerous. She called her father back. "How old are the children?" she asked. A pause. 8, 6, and 4, he said. 2 boys and a girl. She looked at Biscuit, who was sitting on the kitchen counter, watching her with the focused indifference that cats deploy when they sense something is about to change. "Okay," she said. She said it the same way she'd said it to Dr. Harmon. The same quiet receiving of something she hadn't asked for and couldn't refuse. The house was in Rosedale. Of course it was in Rosedale. It was the kind of house that Rosedale existed to contain. 4 stories of pale stones set back from the street behind iron gates and old maples, the kind of trees that had been there long enough to feel like they were standing guard rather than decorating. The driveway was long enough that you had to make a decision to be there before you could see the front door. A man named Greer, 40s, grey suit, the precise posture of someone who had spent decades being professionally neutral, met her at the gate and carried her bags without being asked and did not make conversation. She appreciated that. She was not in a state that invited conversation. The inside of the house was. She searched for the word and landed on considered. Everything had been chosen, but chosen a long time ago, and then left alone, which gave the rooms a quality of settled weight. Good furniture, dark wood, tall windows that let in the grey October light, expensive art on the walls that she didn't look at yet because she was too busy cataloguing exits and corners the way she always did in new spaces. Greer showed her to her room on the 3rd floor and told her that Mr. Voss would meet with her at 7, that dinner for the children was at 5:30, that the children were currently with their tutor in the East Wing. "Their tutor," she said. "Has the tutor been with them long?" Greer's expression shifted by approximately 1 millimeter. 3 weeks, he said. The previous one lasted 2. She unpacked slowly. She put her keyboard against the wall under the window, plugged it in, and played 4 bars of something she didn't have a name for yet. Biscuit, who had made the journey in his carrier with the stoic displeasure of a cat who felt he had not been adequately consulted, stepped out and immediately began to inspect the baseboards with scientific thoroughness. At 5:15, she went downstairs. The 3 children were already at the kitchen table, and they watched her arrive the way children watch something they've already decided about. The oldest was named Rafferty, 8, dark like his father, with eyes that were doing a lot of work to appear unconcerned. The middle one was Phoebe, 6, who was eating her pasta with the focused intensity of someone who had decided that if she concentrated hard enough on the food, she wouldn't have to decide anything about the person who'd just walked in. The youngest was a boy called Fen, 4, round-faced, and the only one who looked at Willa with anything other than careful wariness. He looked at her with pure, uncomplicated assessment, the way small children do before they've learned that looking too directly at something is considered impolite. "You're new," Fen said. "I am," Willa agreed. She sat down at the table without being invited, which she had decided in the stairwell was the right move. Waiting to be invited would be the wrong signal. "My name is Willa," Miss Delaney cried. Fen said helpfully, "That's why she's not here anymore." Fen, Rafferty said with the particular tone of an old sibling who has appointed himself the family's reputation manager. "It's okay," Willa said. She looked at Fen. "Miss Delaney is gone now, though. So that's that." Fen considered this. He ate a piece of pasta. "Do you cry?" he asked. Sometimes, she said. Not at work. She ate dinner with them. She didn't try to entertain them or win them over or perform any version of warmth that would have felt like an audition. She asked Rafferty what he was reading, and he told her, reluctantly. And she said, "That's a hard book for 8. And he said, "I'm almost 9. And she said, "Still." And he looked at her sideways and went back to eating. Phoebe did not speak during dinner, but when Willa got up to take her plate to the sink, Phoebe moved her chair approximately 3 inches to the left, which Willa clocked without acknowledging, because she understood that this was not nothing. Crispin Voss was already in the study when Greer brought her to the door at 7. He was standing at the window with his back to the room, which she would later recognize as one of his habits. Not a power move exactly, but the instinct of someone who thought better when he wasn't being watched. He turned when she came in, and she had a moment of recalibrating between the photographs she'd seen and the actual man, who was taller than she'd expected and somehow quieter, the way that genuinely powerful things are often quiet. "Miss Willa," he said. "Just Willa," she said. He looked at her for a moment, something moving behind his eyes that she couldn't read yet. "Sit down," he said, which was not an invitation so much as a statement about what was about to happen. She sat. He remained standing, which she noted but didn't react to. "I want to be clear about the arrangement," he said. "I'm not interested in performance. I'm not looking for someone to play a role for appearances. My children have had 3 caretakers in 4 months. Each one left because they couldn't manage the situation. I need someone who will stay." "Why did they leave?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Rafferty is difficult," he said, "and the situation in this house is it has been complicated. Their mother died 14 months ago. The children have not had a stable anchor since then. She'd known about the wife car accident on the DVP 18 months ago, which had put the wife in hospital for 4 months before she died. She'd known it from the documents. Knowing it in the same room as Crispin Voss was different. "What do you need from me, specifically?" she asked. He looked at her like the directness of the question had registered. "Consistency," he said, "presence. The children need someone who isn't going to disappear when things get hard. And what do you get out of this beyond the household management?" His jaw moved slightly. "That's not your concern." "I think it is," she said quietly, "since I'm the person in the arrangement." Another silence, longer this time. She had the sense that very few people spoke to him this way, and that he was deciding whether he found it intolerable or interesting. "I need this house to function," he said finally. "I am not able to be here in the way that I need to be. What I do requires my attention in ways that prevent me from providing what my children need. I'm aware of what I'm doing, and I'm not going to pretend it's something other than what it is." She sat with that for a moment. "Okay," she said, 3rd time. Always the same word. She stood up. He looked slightly surprised, as if he'd expected the meeting to take longer. "I'll need access to the children's schedules," she said, "and I'd like to keep my piano in my room. I give lessons on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, remote, so it won't affect the household." "Biscuit stays." He blinked. "The cat," she confirmed. "He's low maintenance." She left before he could revise his position on any of these points. The first 2 weeks were the kind of difficult that doesn't announce itself. It wasn't that Rafferty was cruel. He was 8, and grief at 8 looks like anger because anger is easier to carry. He tested her in the ways that children test people they expect to leave. He hid her sheet music. He gave her the wrong time for his school pickup. He told her once, flatly, that she wasn't part of their family and wasn't going to be. "I know," she said, which was apparently not the answer he'd prepared for. He stared at her. "You're not going to tell me to talk about my feelings," he said, with the withering skepticism of a child who has been sent to a grief counselor. "Only if you want to," she said. "Otherwise, can you help me figure out why the second movement of this piece keeps falling apart in the B section?" She played it on the keyboard she'd set up in the sitting room by then, where the light was better and where the children could wander in and out without it feeling like an invitation. Rafferty stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he came and sat on the bench beside her, not close, but beside. He didn't say anything. She played it again, slowly, and he listened, and when she hit the B section, he said, "There. Just there." And she stopped. "Where?" she said. "Right there," he said. "You rushed it." She had rushed it. She played it again, not rushing. "Better," he said, and got up and left, and she sat there feeling something in her chest loosen by one small degree. Phoebe was different. Phoebe was watchful in the way that middle children sometimes are, accumulating information with the patience of someone who knew that information was its own kind of safety. She started appearing in the kitchen when Willa was making tea, not asking for anything, just present. After a week, she started asking for a cup. After 2 weeks, she started telling Willa about her day while Willa made the tea, in the indirect way of a child who has not yet decided whether trust is permitted. Fen was Fen. Fen had decided on the first night that Willa was a known quantity and had proceeded accordingly, which meant he regularly appeared at her bedroom door with toys to show her and questions that had no clear origin, like why do some birds not fly, and what happens when you run out of songs, and can Biscuit understand what we're saying, or does he just pretend? "I think he understands," she told him once, "but he's decided that most of what we say isn't worth responding to." Fen found this satisfying. He told Biscuit, directly, "I get it." And Biscuit blinked at him in a way that Fen interpreted as meaningful acknowledgement. She saw Crispin Voss rarely. He moved through the house in the early mornings and late evenings, and when their paths crossed, he was always already on his way somewhere else, not dismissive, exactly, but contained, like a man who had learned to exist in a very small space inside himself and had decided it was safer to stay there. He asked after the children in the way of someone asking for a status report. She gave him one. He listened and nodded and disappeared again, but sometimes, passing the library door, she'd see him sitting at his desk not working, just sitting, very still, in the way that people sit when they're exhausted in a way that sleep can't fix. And sometimes, very rarely, she would hear him on the 3rd floor near midnight, pausing outside the children's rooms and not going in, just stopping, like he couldn't afford to. She didn't say anything about this. She was not here to fix him. She was here for the children, and she held that line clearly, the way you hold any line that you need to keep. But one Thursday in November, she came downstairs at midnight for water and found him in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a glass of something she didn't ask about, looking at nothing in particular. She got her water. She sat down at the kitchen table. After a moment, without turning around, he said, "How is Rafferty doing?" "Really, he played piano with me for 40 minutes yesterday," she said. "He didn't know he was doing it. He started correcting my tempo and then just stayed." A pause. "He used to play," Crispin said before. "He still plays," she said. "He just needed a different door in." He turned around then. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his face that wasn't the careful neutrality he carried everywhere else. Something rawer, briefly unguarded. "Thank you," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Not as a comfort, as a fact." He nodded. He looked back at his glass. She took her water and went upstairs, and she sat by her window and played 4 bars of the same piece she'd played the first night, and this time it was different because she knew what room she was in now. In December, something shifted. It started the way things in Crispin Voss's world apparently started, without warning and with significant consequences. She learned about it in increments. Greer being absent 2 mornings in a row, cars arriving at odd hours and leaving quickly, a tension in the house that the children felt without being able to name. Rafferty went quiet in a different way than usual, the way children go quiet when they're trying to listen to something they're not supposed to. She asked Greer, when he reappeared, what was happening. He told her it wasn't her concern, politely, which told her it was serious. She didn't push. She kept the children's routines intact. School, dinner, the piano in the afternoon, Fen's bedtime questions about the nature of the universe. She held the house steady because that was what a house needed when everything outside it was moving fast. One evening, very late, she heard voices from the study that were not measured in the way Crispin's voice was usually measured. She didn't listen at the door. But she sat in the sitting room with her keyboard and played so quietly it was almost not playing at all, and after a while the voices behind the study door lowered. Later she found out, through Greer, who had apparently decided she'd earned some of the truth, that there had been a challenge from within the organization. Someone who had decided that Crispin's domestic situation, his visible distraction, was evidence of weakness. An offer had been made to certain associates that constituted a move against him. She did not ask for more details than this. What she understood was, it had been handled, and the handling had required a display of something that she was glad she hadn't had to watch. She told the children the next morning that everything was fine, and she believed it. And she said it in the tone she'd learned to use, not reassuring in the sugary way, but certain in the factual way. And all three of them looked at her, and looked at each other, and went back to their cereal. It was Rafferty who said it first. January. The three of them were at the piano. It had become a thing. Somehow the three of them plus Willa in the sitting room in the late afternoon, Phoebe doing her homework on the rug, Fen building something complicated out of blocks nearby, Rafferty nominally not paying attention to the piano, until she was working on a new arrangement, something from the Canadian songbook that she'd been commissioned to do. She played a passage she was stuck on, and Rafferty said that chord there sounds wrong, and she said which one, and they went back and forth for 20 minutes, and Phoebe looked up from her homework twice. At the end, Rafferty sat back and said, without looking at her, "I told Dad you were different." She kept her eyes on the keys. What did he say? He said he knew. She played the passage again, the corrected version, all the way through. It resolved the way it was supposed to. Rafferty nodded once, like he'd been part of making something work, which he had. "You know my mum used to play piano," Phoebe said from the rug. Willa looked over at her. "I didn't know that." "She wasn't very good," Phoebe said, which was said with love, not criticism. "But she played every Sunday." "Maybe we should play on Sundays then," Willa said. "We could make it a thing." Phoebe went back to her homework, but she didn't say no. Crispin came to find her in February. She was in the sitting room late, everyone else in bed. He knocked on the open door. She noted the knock from him, and she turned around on the bench. He sat down in the armchair by the window. He was still in the clothes he'd had on at dinner, but his jacket was gone, and he looked like a man who'd been sitting with something for a long time before he got up to do anything about it. "I want to renegotiate the arrangement," he said. She waited. "The debt is cleared," he said. "Your father's debt. It was cleared 2 months ago. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel that you had to leave." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the February wind was doing something serious against the windows. "That's not how you were supposed to tell me that," she said. "I know." "You were supposed to tell me when it happened," she said, "and let me decide." "I know," he said again. "I'm telling you now." She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the eyes she'd spent 4 months learning to read, and what she read in them now was not the careful neutrality or the contained distance. It was something that had been building in increments, in kitchen conversations at midnight and piano bench moments, and the way he'd started lingering in the doorway of the sitting room when she was playing. "What's the renegotiation?" she said. "I'd like you to stay," he said, "not as an arrangement. He stopped. He started again, more carefully, the way he did, when the thing he was trying to say didn't have a protocol. "The children need you. I find I also need you here. I'd like you to consider staying on a different basis." "A different basis," she said. "As someone who belongs here," he said. "If you wanted to." She looked at the piano. She looked at the dark February window. She thought about the paper gown in Dr. Harmon's office, and the parking lot of her Barry apartment building, and the way Fen had said "you're new" on the first night, like it was a neutral fact, and the way Rafferty had said that chord there sounds wrong and been right. She thought about the fact that she had spent 4 months building something she'd been told she couldn't have, and that it had grown anyway, stubbornly and quietly, the way the things that matter always do. "I have conditions," she said. "I'd expect nothing less," he said, and she heard something in his voice she'd never heard before, which was warmth, real warmth, not the formal variety. "The piano stays in the sitting room. Biscuit keeps full run of the house. Sundays are family days. All of us, no calls, no Greer, just the house. And I want to go back to session work eventually, when the kids are settled enough. 1 day a week, maybe 2. He considered each of these. The cat has always had full run of the house, he said. That's Biscuit's position, yes, she said. I wanted it official. He was quiet for a moment, and then he made a sound she hadn't heard from him before, which was very close to a laugh, suppressed but present. All right, he said. She turned back to the piano. She played 4 bars of the Canadian songbook arrangement, the one she'd finally solved. It resolved cleanly. Behind her, she could hear him staying, and she didn't turn around, but she felt the shift in the room the way you feel a temperature change, something that had been held at a careful distance, allowing itself finally to be close. The spring came gradually, the way Canadian springs do, negotiating with winter for weeks before winter finally conceded. Fenn turned 5 in March and requested a party with exactly the guests he wanted, which were Willa, Rafferty, Phoebe, Biscuit, Crispin, and the woman from the bakery on Yonge Street who always gave him the sample tray. "You want the bakery woman at your birthday," Rafferty said flatly. "She's nice and she gives me things," Fenn said with the unassailable logic of a 5-year-old. They did not invite the bakery woman. They did have cake, and the sitting room and the piano, and all the people Fenn actually wanted, and Crispin sat on the floor with Fenn and helped him build the elaborate block structure he'd been working toward for months, and when it finally stood, precarious, magnificent, Fenn turned to Willa with an expression that was the purest version of joy she'd ever seen in a person, and said we did it as if she'd been there all along. She had been there all along. The wedding was simple, in the way that things are simple when they've been a long time becoming. Rosedale in June, the garden behind the house, the old maples in their early summer green. Greer cried, which no one acknowledged, but everyone noted. Fenn wore a clip-on tie and spent the reception informing Biscuit about the significance of the occasion in great detail. Phoebe held Willa's hand during the part where the rings were exchanged. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way you hold on to something you've decided you're keeping. Rafferty played piano. He played the Canadian songbook arrangement that he and Willa had worked on in the sitting room all winter, the one that had been stuck in the B section until he'd told her she was rushing it. He played it all the way through, cleanly, and when it resolved in the final bars, Willa kept her eyes on the garden and the old maples and the grey and silver man who was watching her the way people watch things they hadn't known they were waiting for. She thought, "This is not what I planned." She thought, "This is what I didn't know I was building." She thought about Dr. Harmon and his clipboard and the thin paper gown and the way she'd driven home with the radio off, and she understood that the thing she'd been grieving in that parking lot in Barrie had not been what she thought it was. She'd been grieving a picture, a single version of a thing, and what had grown instead was not a substitute or a consolation. It was its own true thing, with its own specific shape, Rafferty and Phoebe and Fenn shaped, Biscuit on the windowsill shaped, Sunday morning piano shaped, a late-night kitchen and a garden in June, and a man who had learned, slowly and imperfectly and against his own habits, to leave the door open. She had not been sold into anything. She had walked through a door and found out what was on the other side. Fenn tugged at her sleeve. "Can we have more cake now?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "We can have more cake now."